Okay, so we're talking a little bit more about the first study that I spoke to you about in detail this morning. And if we sort of just go back for just a moment, this was a study in which we were specifically looking at the general working dog population, remembering that we were trying to get a handle on what's happening on dogs that are not coming into the vet clinic necessarily, not trial dogs. And we were wanting to know, and in particular what we're going to focus on in this talk, is the frequency of various health problems, and do those health problems as well as other characteristics of the dog relate to, I'm using the term career longevity, but in fact it was whether they were alive or dead at the time of the study. So just to remind you, we are in the lower half of the North Island. For convenience sake, we picked the Manawatu-Wanganui Territorial Land Area. We had a reasonable but not unlimited budget, and so we randomly selected, because that's good design if possible, to get a random selection of farms. In total, 118 to 119, depending on who's done the calculations, were interviewed. And this was, I sort of say we, really it involved one student whose supervisors had a fabulous idea. We'll put you in a camper van and we'll send you around and you can interview all these farmers. And not sufficient with sort of thinking that was brilliant, we decided that all of these areas were sort of quite spaced out, and maybe if you could use some software that's used in operational logistics to work out the shortest possible route to visit all of these. Firstly, we didn't take into account that the farmers didn't want to be interviewed necessarily in the order in which they appeared on the best possible route, but sort of worse than that was that the best possible route didn't always take into account road quality. So this poor student sort of ended up in quite perilous situations at times. But she did a really good job of getting round to all these farms and collecting the data. Now, we did go with quite open-ended questions. We didn't go in and say, has your dog had a musculoskeletal injury? We asked them if your dog had had any health problems in the last 12 months. And we asked that remembering both of the dogs that are currently on the farm and any dog that had been on the farm in the last 12 months. And this is an example of the sort of answers we got. So they're quite variable, and one of the advantages of asking close-end questions is it's much easier for us to analyse the data at the end, because the person giving us the answers has had to work out what category to answer for us. Here we had to work out what category and how to categorise all of these problems. But given we knew very little about how farmers would describe health problems in their dogs, we decided it was better to let them tell us, and then we would categorise it after the fact. So we've then since had another master's student come in, and she's looking at this data, and she's a veterinarian with a very strong interest in working dogs. And what we've done is divided the diseases into congenital, trauma-related, and non-traumatic. So actually I should use the word health event rather than disease. Then for each of these, they've been further classified based on the body system that was affected, and then sort of further down, and I'll show you what this has looked like. Overall, we had, 23 dogs, or 2% of the population, were reported by their owners as having congenital problems. And within that, hip dysplasia was the most common problem to be classified as congenital. We had 8 with leg muscle deformity, and 5 had an undershot mandible or shark jaw, was what some of the owners were calling that. So the congenital problems certainly in this population of dogs did not appear to be a major problem. We then go, and if we look at trauma, and here we have the number of dogs that were affected and then a percentage of the study population. Overall, 25% of dogs suffered some traumatic problem, trauma-related event in the preceding 12 months. I think it's really important to realise that there was a range in severity, okay? So let's not jump to the worst case, which is, gosh, 25% of dogs were run over and killed. We're just saying 25% of dogs had owners who reported a health event. Okay, so let's have a look at the top one, which is musculoskeletal, in detail. I won't go into the second one, which is sort of skin problems, because a lot of those were not actually major events. They were, in fact, sort of skin taken off. They weren't a major issue in that sense. So here you know, I couldn't spell dogs last time. I haven't stuffed up the maths here, I promise. The issue and why we have 157 and versus 136 is because we're now talking about events, and dogs could have more than one musculoskeletal trauma event. The percentages here are percentages of total events rather than the percentage of dogs that affected it. So we had 12% having a musculoskeletal problem, of which a fracture, whether it be a limb fracture or whether it be an axial skeleton fracture, were the most common sorts of musculoskeletal problems. Okay? If we go and now have a look at non-trauma events, and we find here that approximately 50% of dogs were reported as having, by their owner, as having a non-traumatic health event. Again, I just want to say that owners were telling us about skin problems such as flea allergy, dermatitis, and as well as big problems like twisted bowels. Okay, so we've got the real spectrum when we talk about 52%. So if we have a look, we had probably the biggest category was owners telling us that they had metabolic problems. And what we classified as metabolic was underweight, overweight, fluctuating weight, or heat stroke. Okay? So of that 22%, the biggest category were owners who were saying they were struggling to keep weight on their dogs. If we have a look here, what we're seeing is pyodermas, matted coats are our big problems, nail bed infections, and so on. Flea problem and allergy, whether they really should be the same category or not, but we did keep them separate. This was particularly a problem with the bearded hunterways. Musculoskeletal problems, again, are a big problem. We're seeing a lot of arthritis, and we're seeing both infectious and non-infectious, just general lameness being reported. And so, you know, we're seeing this, and don't forget that this population of dogs includes both retired as well as actively working dogs. So what we then wanted to do is we took all the dogs that were alive at the time of the visit, as well as those that were sold. So we're saying that you were alive at the time you left the farm, and so they'll go in together, and aggregated all of the others as sort of dead or alive. Yeah. When we looked at the significance of the association between what factors were associated with whether a dog was dead at the time of the visit, and we found age. We also found any dogs that had heading dog characteristics. So there were some that were hunt-away heading crosses and there. Whether they'd had a health event in the last 12 months was trending towards significance, and most of that was down to the fact that non-traumatic health events, non-trauma related. So when we look at the age, what we're actually finding is a U-shape. They were at greater risk when they were less than 2 years of age. It then sort of reduced the risk, and as they got older, the risk increased again. We see some trend, and it is possible that heading dogs are at greater risk of death, and we need to sort of tease this out and start looking a bit more closely at that. And we found that if you'd had a non-traumatic health event in the last 12 months, there was a 5% increase in the likelihood that you would die. So just in conclusion, where we go from here is that farmers did report a wide range of problems. In reality, a cross-sectional study was not the best way for us to approach this. And you might say, well, why did we do it? And it was really because we don't know enough to have designed a good longitudinal study. And that's where we're going next. So thank you very much for your time.